left it in February 1943.
And then how did that change your life?
Drastically, I guess, at the time. I was drafted at Fort Benjamin, enlisted, or not enlisted, but was inducted at Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis. We left there on March the 5th, 1943. It was 5 degrees below zero. We were dressed in winter uniforms. 3 days later, we ended at Camp Swift, Texas. It was 85 degrees, and we were still in the winter uniforms. I finished training before we went overseas at Camp Carson, Colorado. It was nice. We trained hard. We did the job we had to do, and we were ready when the time came to go to Europe. We left Carson in August of '44 with, I think there were 27 trains it took to move the division. We went to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and from there to Staten Island, New York. We boarded my unit boarded the George Washington for a trip to Europe, and we landed in Cherbourg, France on the 7th of September, 1944. We had one individual, I think, but when he stepped on the gangplank to get on board ship, he was seasick until the day we got there. We landed directly into France. We were the first division to leave the States and go directly to the continent.
Did you see action in France?
We saw no action in France. Our first action was in Belgium and Holland with the 1st Canadian Army.
Talk about that.
And we were up there about 2 months. They pulled 2 regiments off the line and took them down to Germany, to Aachen, Germany. They made contact with the German forces, and then the regiment that I was assigned to, the 104th Infantry Regiment, we were brought down, and the division had 190-some days of contact with the German forces.
And what was your rank at the time?
I was a PFC, and I was, well, 3 of us were offered squad leaders, but we rejected it because we figured we had enough trouble looking out for ourselves.
So what are your strongest memories of in Belgium and Holland and then into Germany?
Well, in Belgium and Holland, I think the first night that we were in combat, I was with the Regimental Anti-Tank Company, and we set up our 57mm anti-tank gun and set up our guard system and spent the first night just watching. And it was quiet, nothing extraordinary happened. And one of the other things that I remember in that part of the country of Europe, one night our squad stayed in a big windmill.
Wow.
We didn't dig holes. We stayed in a big windmill, and that was, to see it up close was fantastic to me anyway. But other than that, we were up there such a short time. I just don't recall any extraordinary events. One thing, we did have a small counterattack, I think the 3rd day we were there, and moved back a little bit, but the next day we moved on up where we were, and that was it.
And then on into Germany.
Then we went into Germany at Aachen, and there is a book out called The Longest Battle. It covers the battle that the United States forces were in between Aachen, Germany and Düren, Germany, which is a distance of about 19 miles. And it took us over 2 months through the Hürtgen forest to cover that distance.
And that was a combined action with the infantry? Who else was there with it?
Well, our division, there were several divisions involved in that particular area. We went through the Hürtgen forest. We spent the winter, 2 coldest months of the winter, in the middle of the Hürtgen forest. And then when we finally got to Düren, we had about a month. I guess this was during the Battle of the Bulge, that we were just holding forces and were stationary for quite almost a month. And one thing that I do remember during that time, we had found an ice cream freezer, a hand-cranked ice cream freezer. We had an individual in our squad that had been a cook. He got the stuff we needed to make ice cream. We had no flavoring. We went to a German drugstore and found a bottle that had cherries on it. We thought that would be good flavoring. We put that in our ice cream. We had cherry ice cream, and they ended up calling it Ingenuity ice cream. These GIs, you leave them alone and they will survive. I guess I was concerned basically, I don't think I was scared, but I was concerned. I tried to take care of myself and watch out. The one big thing I do remember, the night before we went into the city of Cologne, we could not take our guns up, and we were divided in. The squad was divided into bazooka teams, and we went up with the infantry companies. And we were with infantry squad, and that night the Germans threw in such a barrage it felt like you just reach out and grab a round coming in. And I was thinking, this is the end. This is as far as we're going to get. But the next morning, we got up, walked across the city of Cologne. We saw one German soldier that had been routed out of his house, and he was on his way to a POW camp. We found out later that what they had done is thrown this barrage in so they could pull their troops back across the river.
What did that do to the city of Cologne?
The city of Cologne was pretty well damaged, but the cathedral was it had some damage, but it was still intact.
Mm-hmm. And what was your reaction after Cologne? What was next?
We crossed the river on a pontoon bridge south of Cologne, and from then on, it was pretty much just go, 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 because I think the German forces realized that they were defeated, and they moved back. The biggest thing after we crossed the Rhine River was the liberation of the concentration camp in Nordhausen.
Talk about that, Bill.
And I cannot understand myself why some people still deny that this happened, but it did. I was there. And since I've been out of the Army, I have been in touch with a Jewish nurse that was my wife's Holocaust nurse, that is a member of the Holocaust Museum Board in El Paso, Texas. She came in about the second day after she came to treat my wife, and she says, I saw your picture down at the Holocaust Museum. And I was kidding her. I says, with the road gallery. And she says, no, it was with the liberators. And somebody in El Paso in the Jewish community had gotten a list of the military people who were involved in some of the liberation of concentration camps. And since that time, I have been involved in 3 or 4 of the Holocaust memorials, and and the nurse that my wife had is Jewish, as I said, and she has gotten me involved. She told me she was going to get me involved with the Holocaust Museum. And she is one that she will call me and not ask me, but she calls me and tells me, I will pick you up and take you down to the museum.
Sorry,
and this she does.
Are you doing public speaking events, or you're...
And, well, what she did was introduce me to their education advisor. And this young lady, I talked to her for quite a while, and I told her what I had seen over there. And she asked me if I would consent or be available if they had a group that come in that she thought what I had to say would be interesting, if she would call me if I would be available. I says, anytime you have somebody comes in that you think I can help or clear up their minds, I says, give me a call, I will be there. And since that time, she has called me one time, and it was a group of preteens, and they did not, 1 or 2 of them had some idea of what the Holocaust was, but the rest of them, it was completely blank to them, and it's hard to try to convince these little kids what really happened.
Bill, you must have seen some awful things there. How do you determine what it is you're going to tell an audience like that?
Well, in the one factory building, what was left of one factory building there. Underneath the stairwells, bodies were stacked in there like cordwood, like you would stack wood for a fireplace. And out in the streets, there were bodies, and they were nothing but skin and bones. And these were people that had been slave laborers in the caves factories they had there building missiles.
Were there survivors that you might?
There were some survivors. The medics came in, and some of them were so weak and so far gone, even weak broth was enough to do them in. They were that far gone. But there were survivors, and what really, I think, got the most of us, they brought the civilians out there from Nordhausen and showed them what had happened, and they denied even knowing it. And right there, just outside of town, they denied even knowing that that was going on. And this I cannot understand either. But they were all, the men of the town of Nordhausen were gathered up by the army, and they were the ones that cleared out the bodies.
And that was toward the end of the war, wasn't it?
This was in April or May. It was toward the end of the war.
What happened after that? After that?
We moved on, and rather rapidly, and when the war was over, we went to a little town in Germany called Kostitz. And our platoon, or our squad, was in a schoolroom next to the schoolmaster's house. It was attached. And he would have us in, and he could speak enough English that we could get along. And he went around the table asking us our names, and we would tell him, and he would tell us what country our name originated in. And when he got to mine, I told him, he wanted to know what my name was, and I told him it was Danner, and he says, "Oh, Deutsch." But he knew by the names, the backgrounds where we all came from. We were in a little town in Germany called Kostitz, which was close to Leipzig, Germany, and we quartered ourselves in a schoolroom next to adjoined to the schoolmaster's home, and we were there a few days, and we had a hard time convincing him that he no longer needed his blackout curtains, that the war was over and they could have all the lights out that they wanted.
So it was an adjustment for the Germans as well?
It was adjustment for the Germans because they had been under these conditions for so long that it, like anybody else, it takes a few days or a period of time to adjust to your current situation.
You had some contact with the Russians about that, didn't you?
We had contact with the Russians while we were there, and one time there were, one of the days, there were several German citizens from that town came up the street. They were all excited. They go, "Ruski, Ruski, Ruski." And they motioned me to follow, and I followed them down. And there was one of the biggest individuals I'd ever seen in my life standing there, and he was rattling off in Russian. And all at once he says, "Deutschland kaputt." And I said, "Yeah, yeah." And I turned around and left. I didn't want anything to do with him.
So it wasn't much after that, you shipped back to the United States?
We shipped back from the United States. We followed the individuals from World War I. We went back in the 40 and 8s in the regular freight cars, and we departed from, I guess, Cherbourg. I'm not sure. It's where but we landed in New York in July, and the day that we landed in New York, there were 35,000 troops landed in New York from the European battles. And the main idea at that time was to get these people back, get them retrained, and go to Japan, to the Pacific.
You didn't end up in Japan.
We did not end up in the Pacific. The day my 30-day leave was up, the war with Japan was over. The division had orders to camp San Luis Obispo, California. We went out there, they set up a discharge center, and most of us were discharged from Camp San Luis Obispo. My discharge at the end of World War II was on December the 7th, 1945.
Exactly 4 years since the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Exactly 4 years from the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Billy, you said you've done some artwork that just to kind of commemorate some of the stuff.
Well, the only one that I that I did as far as what was connected with the service, on the way back, I saw this one GI was leaning over the rail of the ship, and I had a 5x8 sketch pad, and I did some artwork in high school, and I sketched a picture of this one individual leaning over the railing, and I could not figure out on a troop ship how one soldier could have so much extra space. And I finally decided he must have been what we referred to at the time as a dog robber. These were individuals that their duty was to help take care of the officers on board ship. And that was about the only, the thing that I had done. Several times since then, I've thought about things I would like to try, but I've just never pushed myself to get it done. Well, to me, what I have to think about, when I came back, when I was discharged, I went back into what I was doing before. I had started at college, I went back to college, and at that time, this was behind me. I'd been down that road. And I graduated in 1949 from college. I would go to work, I would be enthused. In 6 months I was fed up with it. 1950, enlisted in the reserves. In 1953, I decided to go back on active duty. I had been married, we got married in November of 1946. I told my wife, I says, I'm going back to the Army. If you want to go, fine. If not, we part friends. She says, I took you for better or for worse. And we had 65 good years. And 1950, and as I said, I enlisted in the reserve. 1953, I went back on active duty. I retired from the Army in August of 1971, which was 41 years ago yesterday.
And that's the day we were at Fort Carson.
I was discharged at Fort Harrison in Indianapolis. I had left my last duty station in Okinawa, and I decided that at that time we had made no plans to move otherwise. I decided to go back to Indiana. That's where I entered the service originally, and I went back there and was discharged on the 31st of August, 1971 from Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indianapolis.
And yesterday we visited Fort Carson on the anniversary of that.
Yes, yesterday we toured for Fort Carson, was on my anniversary. And we were looking around and people would ask me, what changes with Fort Carson? I said, well, the only thing I can see that hasn't changed at Fort Carson was the mountains.
That's great. Bill, is there anything else you want to talk about or share?
Well, to me, we talked a while ago about the end of the war. I think my generation, as far as I know, there was no complaints. Nobody that I remember hearing about was disgruntled with what had happened. We came back, most of us went back to what we were doing before, but recently, in the conflicts that we've had with some of especially Vietnam, with the things that's going on afterwards, I just can't, I guess I'm too much of an American citizen. I like to go with life as it is, roll with the punches, and keep going. Do the best that you can with your life. I belong to an Optimist Club for over almost 35 years. I work with kids. I keep busy. I build youth clubs. To me, anything I can do to keep these young people out of trouble, keep them on the right track, is, I guess, now my aim in life.
That's great, Bill.
That's about it.
Thanks for your service and
Yeah.
thanks for your time this morning. That's great.
Thank you.